So good afternoon, everyone. I just have a few housekeeping matters before we get started. We will be recording this panel and it will be available on the Implementation Project website soon. So thank you all so much for attending this panel, Climate Change and Mental Health in Indigenous Communities, Perspectives and Paths Forward, a side event for the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues taking place at the UN headquarters in New York City, homelands of the Lenape people. My name is Ellie Thurston, and I am the American Indian Law Program Fellow at the University of Colorado Law School. I'm moderating this panel in my capacity as a member of the Implementation Project team, a joint initiative of Colorado Law and the Native American Rights Fund that aims to raise awareness of the United Nations Declaration on the Right of Indigenous Peoples and to provide information and support for implementation efforts in Indian country. The Implementation Project has been attending and participating in the current session of the Permanent Forum with the theme Indigenous Peoples, Human Health, Planetary and Territorial Health, and Climate Change, a rights-based approach. Our group decided to hold this event on the intersection of climate change and mental health after it was mentioned by multiple Indigenous leaders during a roundtable discussion with the US State Department. And we are so excited to introduce two incredible speakers in just a moment to share their experiences in these topics. But first, I just want to share a short background on this issue. Indigenous peoples are on the front lines of climate change and are experiencing its effects more acutely than some other communities. While the physical effects are well known, there has been much less focus on the mental health impacts Indigenous peoples have to grapple with that are exacerbated by socio-cultural contexts and regional variations in climate change. A literature review on this issue showed that mental health outcomes, including depression, anxiety, and other emotional responses, are linked to meteorological factors, seasonality, and chronic and acute weather events. There's also a link between climate change's emotional and psychological impacts and changes in place attachment, disruption of cultural continuity, food insecurity, and other intangible loss and damage in Indigenous communities. This crisis facing Indigenous people's mental health caused by climate change needs to be addressed. And there are articles within the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that lay out rights that need to be upheld and promoted as governments and other groups respond to this crisis in conjunction with Indigenous peoples, including Article 3's right to self-determination, Article 7's right to physical and mental integrity, Article 11's right to maintain, practice, and develop manifestations of culture, Article 18's right to participate in decision-making matters which would affect their rights, Article 19's right to free, prior, and informed consent, and Article 24's right to enjoyment of the high standards of physical and mental health. So with that, I would now like to introduce our two amazing panelists today. First, we have Chairman Frank Edouard-Guichik. Chairman Edouard-Guichik served in tribal elected office for 16 years, 14 as the tribal chairman of the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Ottawa Indians in Harbor Springs, Michigan. During his tenure as tribal chairman, he was instrumental in the adoption of the Tribal and First Nations Great Lakes Water Accord in 2004 and the United League of Indigenous Nations Treaty in 2007. Now serving as the executive director of the United Tribes of Michigan, he is also serving on the Great Lakes Advisory Board for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, is a member of the Great Lakes Water Quality Board for the International Joint Commission, and is the co-chair of the National Congress of American Indians Federal Recognition Task Force. In addition, he is the president of the Association on American Indian Affairs. Chairman Edouard-Guichik represented NCAI at several of the UNFCCC Conference of the Parties and intersessional meetings since 2015. Chairman Edouard-Guichik lives in Harbor Springs, Michigan with his wife, Rochelle. He has 4 adult children and 8 grandchildren. He is a traditional storyteller and potter, believing that Native people need to be rooted in their traditions to be prepared for the future. And next, we have Dr. Mary Hasba Russell. Dr. Russell is a Navajo psychiatrist from Round Rock, Arizona on the Navajo Nation. She is a Distinguished Life Fellow of the American Psychiatric Association and current APA Area 7 trustee, and she works in Santa Fe, New Mexico at the Santa Fe Indian Health Center. She received her medical degree at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis and returned to the Southwest to complete her residency in psychiatry at the University of New Mexico. She received an APA NIMH fellowship during her residency and has since worked for 30 years with Indigenous peoples of the Southwest, Alaska, and British Columbia. She has special expertise in cultural psychiatry, and she grew up on the Navajo reservation with her family and extended Navajo family. Her grandfather, Ashihi, was a revered Navajo medicine man, and she's the lead facilitator to the Indigenous Cultural Competency course, working with the American Psychiatric Association's Division of Diversity and Health Equity. She's a member of the Climate Psychiatry Alliance and the APA Caucus on Climate Change and Mental Health. She presented on a panel discussing missing and murdered Indigenous women at the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women in March 2016. And she has provided presentations on Indigenous knowledge and climate change and wrote a chapter in the book, Groundswell, Indigenous Knowledge and a Call to Action for Climate Change, which was edited by her husband, Joe Neidhart, and her daughter and artist, Nicole Neidhart. Her chapter is on essential elements of change, focused on living within two worlds, Indigenous and Western cultures in this climate crisis. She presented at COP26 in Glasgow in November 2021 with her husband and daughter. The title of their presentation was Walk in Beauty, Future Dreaming Through Indigenous Knowledges in Western Science. She enjoys spending time with her family, hiking, and participating in Navajo ceremonies in New Mexico and Arizona. So thank you both so much for coming to speak on this important issue. And first, Mr. Edo Agishik will share his perspectives.
Thank you, and it's good to have everybody here on this call today. And this is it's such an important thing. Earlier I was talking about how I'm sitting here in spring with the leaves coming out and the birds singing and the light fluffy clouds in the sky and the blue, and it's just the climate today is perfect here. The weather is perfect, and you know, it's the kind of thing that we all our relatives seem to be smiling today. All of the beings that we share the world with, the red-winged blackbird I just heard sing, and all these things. This is that feeling of relationship is so incredible. It's so important to us that we don't think of the world as a place where we're separate from it, that we own it and control it. Rather, we think of the world as it's populated by beings that are our relatives. And so we have this relationship in a way that makes us different than trying to control something, rather than to learn to live with and learn from all of these other beings. And so this worldview, as you mentioned in the introduction, is a critical part of the fundamental understanding in our lifeways. And it's something that as Indigenous people, it's important for us to be aware of, to study and understand the teachings of our ancestors, and to try to live our lives not compartmentalized in apartments and houses and other places around, or in our minds, for instance, but rather to be walking amongst all of our relatives. And I say that because when we talk about climate change, one of the things that we're talking about is literally change and what's happening out there. And several years ago, I heard someone speak and they mentioned the word solastalgia. And solastalgia, it's related to nostalgia, but nostalgia is a loss of your sense of place because you're separated from it either in distance or in time, and you're nostalgic for it. So it's a loss of sense of place. And originally it could be pretty serious. That could, if you lost the will to live, for instance, a child at a boarding school because they're away from their place, they might lose the will to live, and it could be very severe. Well, solastalgia is the loss of your sense of place while you're in your same place. So when the world is changing around you, and you feel, I have all the media, everything's going away, we're losing everything, the world's going to end, there's all these terrible things that are happening, and is this loss of sense of place, where the solastalgia describes a condition that could be mildly irritating, or it can lead to greater dysfunction, and it can lead clear up to exacerbating issues of abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, mental abuse, all of these different things. It can lead up to the point of actual death if you get ill from this dis-ease of losing your sense of place. But what we have as Indigenous people is this very strong worldview that's rooted in our ancestors and in those teachings that tell us how to learn to live with and to adapt to the changes around us. We think of the world as sort of being a constant, and it's changing now, but actually it's been constantly changing all the time. So with that means that we have this ability to if we follow those traditional teachings and understand what we learn, what the other beings are telling us, we may have different crops we need to grow. We may have different foods we need to eat. Some medicines will move away from us and others may move to where we are. But we have to learn how to have that. And once you have that feeling of comfort of our traditions, of understanding our traditional ways, then what that does is it arms you to deal with all of these different issues that are out there. And so I realize in this relatively short today, I could talk all day just about these issues, but I want the key point here is that we have in our traditions the things we need to help make changes. And so when you say, how do we deal with this? What is it that we have to, can we deal with this dis-ease that we feel, this solastalgia that is prevalent in our communities? But it's not just us that have it as Indigenous people. It's the human population as a whole suffering through this. But what we have to do is first of all, you have to be aware of it. You have to name what the problem is. And then you have to figure out what are your strengths that can help you deal with it. And then you have to engage. And so that's what we're doing at the UN is we're engaging the nation states of the world in understanding our philosophy, understanding these teachings, because these don't just belong to us, they're gifts for humanity. But we have to help them understand how to employ these gifts to deal with the changes that we're faced in the midst of this great despair and dire emergencies that we find ourselves in, both individually and nationally around the world. And I guess with that, I'll leave it for right now, and maybe we can have our next speaker. And then I understand we have Q&A coming. And I do ask during the Q&A that if anything gets in the chat, will you please read it out to me or something, because I'm on a cell phone, I might not see it. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chairman Edowagishik, for your perspectives. And now, Dr. Russell, please share yours. Thank you.
I wanted to introduce myself in my Navajo way as well, and then do a territorial acknowledgement from where I am here as well. But Mary Hasbar Russell Yanishye, Kia Ani Nishle, Do Sena Jenny Bashichin, Do Ashinhi Dashiche, Do Belagana Dashanella. This is a way of creating a relationship with all of you and any Navajos out there. There always is one, usually in the crowd, I've come to find out. And I just wanted to also say that where I am coming from is I'm in Tewa territory, the Pueblo people here in Santa Fe. And so I wanted to acknowledge that I am living and working on the ancestral homelands of the Tewa people on a place called Powoge Place or White Shell Place. And this place is also known as Santa Fe, and the Tusuki Pueblo people also live nearby. And Santa Fe is located on unceded Indigenous territory where many of the Tewa people were forcibly removed or killed, defending their homelands and sacred sites and rivers when the Spanish settled here, hundreds of years ago. I recognize the present day Tewa people and their ancestors loved and cared for these lands for centuries. And within these lands have come their language, culture, ceremonies, values, medicines, and laws. And I am honored to be a guest in this territory. The first comments that I wanted to share is to really kind of build upon what Frank had talked about in terms of the resilience of us Indigenous peoples in dealing with this climate crisis. Part of my wanting to go into psychiatry was that the Navajo people have a worldview, very, very holistic, and we look at the body, mind, and spirit in healing, and the relationships with all creation. That's being in relationship with the relationality and how there's these intricate relationships that we are all a part of in nature. And even with the issues that are coming up with the changing climate that we're having to adapt and adjust to, we know that change is the only constant. This is kind of our premise. And I think Indigenous peoples really grasp that because of how with contact, colonization, the doctrine of discovery, manifest destiny, all of those things, we've been forcibly having to deal with how to adapt and change and continue to be resilient. And so it's something that we continue to be leaders in this country, in this world. And I think that now people are just waking up to that we are the resilient people, and how, they want to tap into how do you do it? But I think it is getting into relationship yourself, whether you're non-Indigenous or Indigenous, with nature and with your surroundings. And so for me, like, and being in relationship with my human relatives, the five-fingered people. I'm also stating that I am in relationship with the natural world and how we relate, and that we are part of nature. We are not over nature. We don't control nature. We don't take her, and extrapolate resources from her. We are here to protect and continue to live for our Nehema Nahastsa, Mother Earth. And those are really important concepts that for me, growing up with my grandfather and with my family, that, I realized, if that those interrelationships, that I can do that also as a psychiatrist, as a medical doctor. And even my Ashihi, my Che, was like, what, you're going to be a doctor? You don't, that's not what I thought you were going to do. I thought you were going to be a veterinarian, or with, and take care of animals. But, as I've continued to work in this field and realize, we always look at the positive part of these problems. And so again, that's part of how we are growing and changing and adapting, that there's always something positive to look into. And I also feel that, a message that Indigenous people, especially all, we all have our own creation stories, and knowing where we came from. That's our identity, and where we know we have evolved from. And so we've been through apocalypses before, because we had to emerge into different worlds. And so we're in the fourth world, the glittering world now, for the Navajo. And so we've been confronting monsters, the monster of climate change, the monster of colonization, the monster of genocide, but we're working to adapt and change and continue to be in relationship with everyone. And I think that that's where we really need to come together on. And I know we'll speak a little bit more around mental health issues, but for me, it was always being positive. And I know mental health issues and the issues that Indigenous people are confronted with, high rates of, you name it, right? But we're still here, and we're still resilient, and we're still reclaiming our lands. We're still reclaiming our traditions. We're still working on the problems of, when there's suicides in the community, of coming together and being in relationship and caring for one another. So I really believe and want to share that these are things that, it just builds upon. And I want to also bring up one of the things that I feel is really valuable is that, we're out of balance in this world, right? It's the patriarchy that is really taking hold, colonization, extraction of resources, raping women, the missing and murdered Indigenous relatives crisis. And so that balance is that we're not caring for the life-giving forces of our people. And so the rematriation is reclaiming that we need to reclaim a spiritual connection, get back into our relationship with our mother and with our earth, with Mother Earth, with life-giving energy, the feminine love. And so, again, that's where I feel that, we can move forward and really support those movements. Women are at the front lines, Indigenous women mostly in all of these fights, because of us feeling and recognizing how vital we need to continue to have life and to give life. And so that's, you know, kind of where I wanted to share right now, those specific issues and premises where I'm coming from, and how I continue to believe that there is hope, there is opportunity, because, you know, we can only go forward, and we all have to do it together.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Chairman Edwagishik, is there anything that you would like to respond to or add to the conversation?
I'm really, it's amazing how, you know, we have from quite different parts of the geography within North America, we have very similar understandings and views. I think that's, I found that to be true not only across North America, but I find that to be true with Indigenous people that I've met from all over the world, have some very similar kinds of views.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions from any of the attendees? You can raise your hand and unmute. Oh, I think we have one in the chat. Kim Goshak asked, because so much of Indigenous knowledge consists of values derived from a life lived in harmony with nature, how can these values be imparted to those from a different reality?
Partly by example. I can think of one. We were negotiating on for the facilitative working group. That's part of the implementation of the Paris Accord, the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform. And we were, there were almost 60 of us or so in a room with a big square table. And we were down to one of the last points in the negotiation to establish this. And two of the countries were out in the hall working on trying to resolve it. And they were over the last point, they were working on this. And the rest of us were sitting in the room, basically doing nothing for about an hour. And the tension was really high in the room. We were really, it was very difficult to, you know, because it was so important for us to have Indigenous people and the nations being able to meet together as equals at the table in this facilitative working group that we were working to establish. And the tension was really high in the room. And then one of the Sami fellows got up and sang a song. And then the Yaqui woman stood up and she sang a song. And then a woman from Indonesia put some music on and she did a dance to this traditional music. And then I sang a song from the Great Lakes and other people sang, and the tension in the room just fell, came down and down and down. And then the people from the hall walked in and said they'd solved the problem. Well, they thought they solved it, but we think we solved it because we demonstrated our traditions and our way of relating to the world. And I think that's you know, there's a big part of that that we find that we often will, during presentations, will sing a song when other people don't. They think songs, music, that's for some other place. But we understand that music and that expression of art and beauty is part of our relation to the natural world, and that it touches other people. So by demonstrating what that is it helps to bring out those things, because ultimately we're all indigenous to the earth, everybody. And so some of us are much closer to our indigenous roots than others. And we are more aware of how these interconnections are. And then there are people that have drifted quite a ways from it and compartmentalized their life away from these things. And we're trying to help break down those barriers, those silos, and help them understand that we have one earth and one water and one sky, and we have to protect all of our relatives. Thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Russell, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think, you know, this is something that I strive to share and be willing to be open and provide opportunities to share my perspective, because from an Indigenous worldview, having lived in multiple cultures and obviously the culture of medicine as well, I think part of it is being open to new, to all the realities, and to really understand the history of how the United States, North America, was established, and why there is like erasure and silencing of Indigenous peoples, and why, now all of a sudden we want to know how to relate to Indigenous peoples. Well, why is that? What's that about? We need to expand our knowledges and know that it's not just one Western model, Western thought. Be part of nature, go into nature, feel your footsteps connecting to the earth. Denepikeya means that my moccasin, my footprint is landing on the earth, and I have this energetic relationship with the earth. And so then feel that, be in that. I mean, there's lots of places where we can do that. And as we're dealing with the climate crisis, we need to know that we have to be in relationship to Mother Earth and recognize, why are some of us so passionate about caring for her and caring to protect her? It's because we have a relationship. So create your own relationship with Mother Earth, and then you can be more open and understanding and recognize that, Indigenous knowledges are very intricate in terms of how we relate to nature, and that we don't try to have a hierarchy. And it's just allowing yourself really to open up to another way of thinking. And so, like, even for myself, like, I'm, on the board of trustees, we were dealing with structural racism, right, within our own entity, and still working on it. Obviously, it's not something you snap your fingers and change. But because of the foundations of how things have been out of balance, and how we only focus on one worldview, and that's what is supposed to make us, a better nation or whatever, we need to open up and be accepting of all the people that are in the room, and our perspectives and our experiences, and ask for that. Ask for those perspectives, ask for the differences, understand, allow for that space, be a good ally to allow and elevate and allow us who are always silenced to have a place at the table, to have a way of expressing ourselves and sharing a different way of being together. And part of that too is the experience, right? Experiential opportunities. And so, like, in meetings, even like to really get people to open themselves up to another worldview, we've utilized like the circle wave process, which is, turning the hierarchy on its side in these places, because that's where we always go to, is hierarchy. And so then just allowing yourself to say, there's so many places where I can just be different and allow for these changes, and not perpetuate the way things have been with our dominant society, so to speak. And so I think that, that it's just really, really valuable that, you're here and you're listening and have conversation, be in conversation with one another. We're all together, like Frank was saying, tension comes, but we know how to break the tension and get to that next place that we need to be, but we're still in relationship, we're still together. Because we have creation stories that talked about how we dealt with it all. We have experience from it, from our animal relatives, when we were fighting, creating certain things, creating the Milky Way. Oh, well, that didn't happen the way we thought it was going to be, but we lived through it, and look at the beauty we have of the stars and everything. So, I mean, it's not all going to be lost, but we can move together and move to a different place. We're still in relationship and working together.
Thank you so much. It's so inspiring to hear
about this. This is Frank. I just wanted to add that an example of how we've actually moved things in some ways in understanding this way of life And our worldview is the National Trust for Historic Preservation in the US, for instance. They were well known for years for saving rich old white guys' properties. And that's by their own words. That's what they did. And they started diversifying and getting other views in. And they publish a list of the 11 most endangered places every year. And it always used to be a mansion here and a building, a meeting house there. And in the last decade or so, they've been adding sacred landscapes, and they've been realizing that it doesn't have to, it's not just the built environment that we relate to, but there are ceremonial sites and other places that have equal importance to these others. So they've been changing that view within that organization. And that's just one example of how Indigenous involvement in these organizations has helped to turn them more towards our particular ways of view. And this is true in this experience can be carried into all kinds of other organizations, which is why we worked hard to create the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and all the different mechanisms at the UN that involve Indigenous people. None of them were there. And we had to work hard. Other people, I say we as the collective we, I wasn't one doing those at the time. Some of this predates my work there. But what happens is that we created these various venues, the MRIP, the Permanent Forum, the Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Rights, and then the work that we've now done for the facilitative working group at the Climate Change Conference. And also that we've been able to help get our worldview into a new treaty that's about to be signed on oceans, on biodiversity in the oceans, that we've just gotten word on that's coming out really soon now. But all of that stuff is helping. Well, we've helped to bring this out and to help bring this difference and this broadening and this way of worldview that we've been that actually both of us have been talking about here.
Thank you so much. So that kind of leads into a question from the chat from Laura El Katiri. I apologize if I did not pronounce that correctly. But one of her questions was, what can international organizations such as the UN do to strengthen Indigenous peoples' inclusion in climate-related decision-making so enhance participation?
I'll take a first stab at that. I would say one is hold meetings like we're at, like the Permanent Forum, is to continue to do that work. We can get our the sort of foot in the door, so to speak, but we have to work hard to make sure that it's meaningful when we're there, that we can actually have meaningful input. But it's those kind of things that in virtually there isn't a single different issue that the UN's dealing with that Indigenous people aren't somehow affected by it. And they would like to think that unless it has the word Indigenous in it, then we shouldn't be there. But if it's talking about oceans, it's us. If it's talking about trees, it's us. If it's talking about peace, it's us. If it's talking about stopping war or different things, it still affects us. So we have to be able to be involved everywhere.
Yeah, I obviously don't have that experience of the United Nations and how it works and all of that, but I still believe as well, yes, we need to be involved in all aspects of situations that involve nature and human rights, because we are impacted by that. And I think, having the youth voice is really important. So always having opportunities for the youth to be able to have a place at the table with some of these conferences, side conferences, even maybe their own conference and forums, because that is really important. We need to care for the youth. The youth are really being impacted. And I think, the holistic and the mental health component also needs to be a part of that and connected, because we're going to be more impacted. Issues of eco-anxiety, the issues of the youth young kids be already having a couple of traumas because of natural events, historical trauma with families, intergenerational trauma, all of those things we need to elevate and support, and know that we need to still be involved in those conversations and having opportunities to have reconciliation as well.
Yeah, I think that youth voice is really, really important. I learned a valuable lesson from a young man from the Sami who was presenting as part of the Youth Council's presentation in Glasgow. And he was talking about how the salmon are going away from their village where they're living, and everybody's going, what are we going to do? How are we going to live? Because we're so dependent upon this, it's really critical for us. And what this young man said he noticed is that as the salmon were going away, there were some other fish coming. So he went out and he sang to the fish, and he talked to the fish, and he said he was getting to know the fish and honor their spirit and to figure out how to catch and cook them. And that is that next generation following our traditional values, looking at how do we adapt to the world that's changing, that's around us right now. And that's I learned that lesson to be thinking about that, because it isn't just about those fish. It's about all of our life, everything that's going to be changing. We have to learn how to deal with that. And we have our youth they're already doing it sometimes when we're not even looking.
Thank you so much. And there has been a pretty good representation of Indigenous youth here at the Permanent Forum, which has been really exciting to see. And then we have another question from Judge Greg Bigler, also relating to young people. But his question is, with so many of our young raised or residing in cities and knowing only some of their traditions, but suffering all of the mental health and psychosis from drugs, poverty, and other issues, how do you tie that traditional to traditional remedies, and what other means do we have to help them? Sorry, there's an alarm going off in my room. I'm not really sure what it is, but
You take a stab at that one first.
Okay.
I feel that we need to recognize there's a lot going on in this world right now, especially everybody being impacted with the pandemic. So we were all sort of in some places struggling with similar issues, but for Indigenous youth who and other youth, non-Indigenous that are mostly living in a world that's cement. I feel that it's important for parents and schools and other places where they can be involved to have that involvement and connection to nature. And I also feel that when they are Indigenous youth and they are, say, mostly growing up in cities, that there usually is a connection to back home. And that people aren't necessarily permanently located in a city, especially as Indigenous peoples. I know that there was, the relocation of movement in the 1950s, where many Indigenous peoples ended up in cities and severed their ties a lot from their own cultures. But people are really coming home, and everyone is always, as far as I know, they talk about it with me, reclaiming and re-energized and getting back into their traditions. And even in cities, there are programs where there's a real traditional, sometimes it's pan-Indian types of programming, but still it's helping people to kind of, especially young people, get in touch with their identity of who they are, where they came from, and help explore that and understand how they can grow and be stronger and be resilient. But I feel that there are a lot of these things going on. There's Indian centers, Indigenous centers in many of the cities of the United States, and that they're doing their part in trying to help facilitate and bring back cultural teachings and that type of thing. But it also is, it is imperative, and again, this is part of, I think, Indigenous peoples, for us to always be aware of those kinds of things happening, where whatever city you're living in, to know that, oh, how can I do more? How can I help some of my young relatives here and help with a group, or help with teaching a cultural teaching, or something like that, because I believe that we all want to know and welcome and involve our young people, because there is a lot that the young people are going through, and helping to, I mean, a lot of the times when we're feeling very overwhelmed and this climate crisis and disruption really affecting us, it is taking that action and going forward and moving forward. And so we have a youth group here called Yaka that is working with climate change issues. And so we are doing those types of things.
Great, thank you so much. Is there anything that you'd like to add, Mr. Edowagishik? So you are muted.
Unmute. There we go. Okay. Yes, I was going to say that Judge Bigler's question is a good one, but it isn't just the people that are in the cities that are suffering from this disconnect. There are people who live right in the middle of our Native communities that have been disconnected in many ways as well. And so we have to work on trying to help all of the folks connect again, and to understand that it's the view of the world that's important, and we have to try to help people find that. So those people who have the knowledge, we need to make ourselves available to those who are seeking it, and to take young people, or even the middle-aged, and I've had elders who came to me who did not learn when they were young, and now are very eager to understand and know more. And so that thirst for knowledge, we have to be ready to give them a drink when they're thirsting for knowledge. We've got to be ready to do that. So part of that is through official programs. Part of it is through to just living our life and being available, and realizing that whatever we have of value in this, when we're connected, that will help everybody. And so but it is a big issue, and I know I have many relatives who live in the cities and have had a lot of issues. I think of the book There, Tommy Orange book, that is dealing with the urban Indians issues, and all of the different kinds of things that we have that are part of our culture and part of our struggle. But that struggle it's why we're alive. It's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help everybody get through this. And of course, being in the tribal courts, unfortunately, just like doctors usually see the people that are ill, and they don't all the time. Well, the people in the courts, we don't see the average person very often. The people that we see are the ones who are struggling. And so I think that it does give you an interesting perspective on the world. But we need to protect this. We need to present our cultures and these thoughts and way of life, and it's available to us. And we need to find ways to make sure that we get that out there to this current and those coming generations as well.
I just wanted to add to that too, that I was thinking about it, but art is a really wonderful expression as well, in terms of, when you're struggling and dealing with conflicts and with this world, when you express yourself through your art. There's, speaking about, say, my daughter, Nicole, who's an artist and did her MFA on Indigenous futurisms. And so I think, a lot of Indigenous artists are looking to Indigenous futurisms, because it is bringing in your ancestors, you know, who are right here with us, and have time traveling ancestors. You know, that's what she's doing. And so, you know, you're dealing with these conflicts, and you're exploring and understanding your family heritage, and who your ancestors are, and the fights that we dealt with the long walk and that type of thing. And so knowing that we have all this resilience in our own family and communities, and so then helping the students and helping them to kind of use their creative talents to problem solve and figure out, okay, how can we move forward and dream of a better world, right? That's what, you know, our premise and talk was about when we presented at COP26. And so, you know, we're also you know, creating online forums and things like that. You know, like we have a Groundswell Climate Collective, which is an Indigenous forum focused on the youth who can come and help offer poetry, paintings, different things to help kind of express how they're dealing with and struggling with the climate crisis. And so then I think if we cultivate that with our youth, there's hope and then an opportunity to be able to move forward.
I'd like to add, I know this, that you brought the fact that our ancestors are with us, and we're here and we're doing what we're doing because we've had good ancestors. And I think that as we strive to do this, to deal with climate change, and we're doing our part in helping our people, but we can't help our people without helping all people. And that as we strive to be good ancestors ourselves someday.
Thank you both so much. Now I'd like to introduce Professor Kristen Carpenter, who is the director of the American Indian Law Program at Colorado Law School and is also the co-director of the implementation project.
Thanks, Ellie, and thank you to Dr. Russell and Chairman Gishik for being on this important event. I do have a question, but I first wanted to take a moment just to acknowledge Ellie for her incredible work, her vision in putting together this panel, and it reflects already so many of the themes you all have described. When we started, as Ellie says, consulting with the State Department, a number of tribal leaders, knowing that this year's theme was health, they kind of dialed in on the mental health and climate change aspect of that. And I think as a youth herself, or at least a much younger lawyer than I am, that really resonated with her and the other junior member of our team. And they put this event together themselves. So, and, you know, just want to acknowledge Ellie in that regard. She's off not too long from now to an amazing career at the Environmental Protection Agency as an attorney. And I know she's going to carry this wisdom and experience with her. My question is, I think building on the conversation that we've just had about youth, we talk so much in Indian country about intergenerational trauma. And I think now it's well known that many of our communities and families suffer from intergenerational trauma. And I suspect that our relationship with the earth is also part of that, the dislocation that Dr. Russell talked about through the relocation program, well, going all the way back to assimilation and relocation, and all of these things that have taken Indigenous people from their homelands and sometimes taken their children from them, must, I think, have something to do with the current state of the earth and the way people are suffering today. And I guess my question is, sorry, it's taking me forever to get to it. Acknowledging intergenerational trauma, thinking about the rights and remedies under the Declaration, what kind of sort of hands-on work or advice do you have for dealing with families as systems? So not just the youth, but the youth and the parents and the grandparents and the memories going back and those concerns about the future. If you might each comment on that a little bit. Thank you.
I'll start on that. We've talked often about intergenerational trauma, but we forget that there's intergenerational healing as well. In other words, there's another side to that. It's not all trauma, but the things that are good are also intergenerational, and we try to pass them on. And so what we're trying to do is encourage the good things and discourage the bad things, and to feel, how do we deal with that? Part of it is to make sure that we have ways for different generations to work. And we've talked about the importance here. Both of us have talked about the importance of youth, the youth voice being part of what we're doing. And we're also, we realize that we need multi-generational views on these things, and thinking of the family. When you think of the family as a system, when I talk about all of our relatives, all of creation is a system. It's all one big system, and we treat our relatives together. So, and we treat them in a good way. And we know that there are some people who have been suffering from abuse themselves, who then abuse the natural world, and they abuse their brothers and sisters and other people in the world. And we try to help them heal with that. And part of it is to get back to that basic understanding of how we're all related, and that following, and it's hard. It sounds so simple to say, but it is a lot more difficult. And I just think that it's important for us to engage whenever we can, and as often as we can, with our own families and with families in our communities, and the community of human beings all over the earth, to engage, to try to help our brothers and sisters who are from other continents and other nations, to help them heal as well.
I think we have been impacted, with the intergenerational trauma, the historical trauma, and you're aware of the historical trauma response that Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart described, and it has kind of focused a lot of her healing and therapy on. But that is the cumulative emotional harm of an individual or a generation caused by traumatic experiences or events. And of course, it is an unresolved grief that we're all, really experiencing. And I think in a family system, you really see that, when you look into the extended family and you see how there's been a breakdown in our traditional family roles. And when you're taken away from your family and all you know is corporal punishment, your love goes away. You don't have love. You don't have love to share. You go home when you're 16 years old and you're trying to be a parent by your 18 or 20 or whatever. Obviously, that's not going to work very well. And so I think we're all coming together finally. And then the residential school experience just really, especially in Canada, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that is still ongoing, that they're working through is really a part of like naming that trauma and naming also the resilience, and that those folks are still here. They gave their testimony and they shared, this is what really, really did happen. Don't tell me that it didn't. And so I think, as we come together as families and the kids hear the voices of their parents sharing that horrific trauma, the kids start to understand, that's why mom never hugs me, or, is always sitting over here in the room and never communicating. And so then there has to be a healing process. And we really have to recognize that we're not going to get mad or say, why can't you be a good parent? It's like, okay, we're on a healing journey. We're changing. We're going to reclaim our traditional roles, because at least we do, as Indigenous people, still have traditional roles, and we still have carriers of knowledge, healers, who can help us to get back to that place of where we need to know what our role is in this family system, because we need to reclaim that and really come together as families again. And that's what we have, so many opportunities to do that. When you go to a ceremony, you're doing that because so many different family members are there supporting and caring for the person who is the patient. when you go to powwows or other healing places, families are together helping each other. And so when we keep opening our arms open and invite everybody in and love each other and show that expression and be models of hugging and caring for one another, then we start to realize that we can do it as Indigenous peoples. But it is really important to see this as a whole system-wide, it's not just one patient that is being affected coming into therapy and has PTSD, because cumulative traumas have occurred to them. And so it is really important to have the family system become intact again and reclaim those traditional roles and traditional ceremonies, the Kenalta for the coming of age. Many nations are getting back into that and helping to have coming of age ceremonies, knowing that then people start to realize the roles that they have are very important. And so, yeah, I think that is part of our healing journey, but we may not be doing things perfectly in some areas, and that's why we have a lot of mental health types of issues. But when we, and especially me, as a healer and other healers that are coming into our Indigenous communities, need to understand the history, because if we don't, and we're trying to help Indigenous peoples and the system and the family, we just say, this is the patient and there's something wrong with you and why can't you change, and yet we don't look at the whole world, like this is what has happened to this person and you should be thankful that they actually showed up and they're there for you and they're willing to change and grow and heal. So we have to change as therapists, as psychiatrists, doctors, providers of care, and obviously have more of us, more Indigenous people to be able to provide that as well, so that we feel more comfortable with people who are from our own community. We don't have to, explain ourselves and things like that. But I think it is a really important thing to move forward in terms of these systems of a family.
Thank you so much for that. So we are at time. And I just wanted to thank you both so much for your words on this topic. And I'm one of those people who can sometimes get bogged down in like how the outlook of all of the climate news and everything like that. But it's been so wonderful to hear such positive perspectives on paths forward. So thank you again so much for coming. And as we close, I want to thank Mason Estes, who's the project, who is the project coordinator for the implementation project. And he unfortunately could not attend today because he is ill. And I wanted to thank Sue Noe and Kim Goshok from NARF for their support in the preparation of this event, and Teresa Coberly from Law IT at Colorado Law for her support in the preparation of this event. And thank you all so much for attending. If you'd like to learn more about the implementation project, please visit our website from the link that I'm about to share in the chat, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Appreciate it. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you.
Nice to meet
Take
you
care.
too.
Bye.
Bye.